Hello, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon here near Washington, D.C. And it's my pleasure to be here again and for my weekly chat with Lee Weissman and Friends. And so far, I'm the only one here. So if you would like to join and can join the conversation, that's easy enough. Wherever you can see me, for example, if you're on Facebook, you can also see the link. There's a StreamYard link. And all you have to do is click that StreamYard link and it will bring you right into this room. And I will bring you right in here with me and we can have a conversation together. So come on in. And hopefully folks will come in. Otherwise, you'll have to listen to me talk to myself for a little while. But I guess maybe there are worse things, or maybe there aren't worse things. I don't know. Okay, so our topic today is really about culture. And my question was, what do you like most about your culture, and what do maybe you not like so much about your culture? And what we look at our culture, and sometimes there are things that we really love and appreciate, and things that maybe we don't appreciate so much. And this is an opportunity for us to talk to each other about our cultures, about the worlds that we come from, and communicate with each other about the worlds that we come from. And I see I have at least one guest, which is very nice, and so I'll invite her in a second. And I hope more people will come. So please come join me. I'm sitting here. I only have one guest so far, and I would love to have the opportunity to talk to you and to learn from you and to learn about your culture. And that would be really my pleasure. One of the things that I found is I used to do a lot of traveling, and I found myself being a stranger. And when you're a stranger, you have the opportunity to kind of look at yourself in a different way. When we live in a place, if we live in that place our whole life, it's sometimes very difficult to kind of look at our culture in an objective way. But when we travel or we go to someplace else, our culture becomes much more clear. And I think the same can be true even of the internet. We come to Facebook and Twitter and all these things with our cultures and our cultural assumptions, and sometimes we find those things challenged. It's as if we're kind of entering into the big world, and so we can use this as an opportunity. Use even social media as an opportunity for us to kind of take a good look at ourselves and to look at our cultures and to take a look at what we appreciate about them and what we should appreciate about them, and what we might also want to question for ourselves or as a group or as a society. So that was my question for today. And I still don't have any guests. I had one guest, the guest gone, so I'm just going to talk a little bit. There she is. She's back again. Yay, Fatima is here. Here, I'll bring Fatima in. Welcome, Fatima. So now we have two here. We have myself and Fatima. Two people from two very different cultures, or maybe not so different in some ways, but we'll talk about that. And Fatima's from Pakistan. We know each other already. And welcome, Fatima.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure to have you. So my topic for today is, what is it that we really love about our culture? And what is it that maybe, are there things that maybe we don't love so much? And I should give a fair warning. about myself that I really have two cultures. You know, on the one hand, I'm Jewish, and I would say that that's kind of my main culture, is my religious culture. But I'm also American. I grew up in the United States, and I think of myself as American, and identify to some extent with American values. So when I talk about culture, sometimes I'm talking about Jewish culture, sometimes I'm talking about American culture or Western culture, and sometimes I go between those two things. Um, so hopefully other folks will join us, but I'm very happy to be with Fatima. So Fatima, what's one thing that you just love about Pakistani culture?
What I love about the Pakistani culture में मुझे I love to the hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
It is the main part of the Pakistani culture.
Mm-hmm. So you really love that. So tell me describe what is Pakistani.
Hello,
Hello, can you hear me?
can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
So this
Testing.
is, I think, like a very special.
Oh, okay. Well, we're having technical difficulties on that end, but hopefully they'll get hopefully the hopefully they'll get solved. I hope that other people will come join in. Please come on in. If you take a look at Facebook, you'll see that there's a link, and I'm going to actually kind of share that. I'm going to share that again now, just in case people didn't get it, and I'm going to share it again on. Um, I'm going to share again on Twitter just in case. Okay, and hopefully people will join in. Okay, so just did that, and hopefully Fatima will come back. Fatima said to me that what she most enjoys about Pakistani culture is hospitality. I would, and interestingly enough, I would say that's one of the things that I love about my Jewish culture. Also, is that we have this very beautiful custom of um, of inviting guests to our home and being hospitable to them and taking care of them. And I think these are ancient, very ancient traditions of ours, to do that go all the way back to Abraham, peace be upon him, that he would invite guests to his home, and I think that that's part of part of our culture as his descendants, and that's one of the things that I appreciate quite a lot. Another feature that I really appreciate about my culture, and here I mean Jewish culture, um, is that we are questioners. One of the things about Jewish culture is that we are really encouraged to engage in kind of intellectual inquiry and to ask questions, and that makes us, on the one hand, makes us quite um, analytical, um, and can make some people extremely logical. I'm not particularly one of them, um, but it kind of is a way of thinking that kind of allows people to explore questions, I think, in a deeper way, and I think it's a beautiful feature. Um, Conversations between Jewish people tend to be very in depth and deep and probing, and that's something which I think is beautiful. It's also something sometimes I don't like, because I think sometimes we question too much. There are some things in life that we should be able to take for granted. Welcome back, Fatima. I hope the internet allows you
Welcome
to
back.
stay. um, So you said very much you appreciate the hospitality. So can you describe what is Pakistani hospitality like? So if I what's that look like?
Yes, fortunately, when we are doing live. I don't know okay, why the internet connections were having the
Oh,
problem still right now.
okay. Well, I appreciate your trying. I appreciate your trying. If you
That
give up, I appreciate. Oh, poor thing. Okay, very difficult. Okay, hopefully she'll get that together. Um, but it seems if I'm not going to have any other guests today, and she's having a problem. Um, so I'll just continue a little bit longer, and then people can watch me offering my opinions to myself if they want to. Um, uh, and I was going to say that's I think I really appreciate um, about my Jewish culture. I really appreciate the fact that we question a lot. About my American culture, I appreciate our um, at least our theoretical love of freedom. I mean, and I don't want to get into the politics of all that because, when we look at America's impact on the world, very often it's not necessarily to promote freedom, but I would say on an individual level, Americans as individuals and kind of as a culture, we tend to value freedom, and I think that value on personal freedom, on intellectual freedom, on, for example, freedom of the press and the freedom of expression. I think those are very good things. My Jewish side, my religious side, says that there are limitations to that, that there are moral and ethical limitations to that. But at the same time, there's also something very powerful about that, about that love of freedom. Um, in my Jewish culture, one of the things that I think I really love is the feeling of connection that Jewish people have with each other. We're of course a very small community. I think most people don't realize that we're, I don't know, 0.01% of the world's population. We're 1% of 1% of the world's population, something like that. Very small number of us. Uh, and so we feel a very strong family connection with each other. And so it's possible to travel, to some far-flung place in the world. I can go to Finland, or I could go to Morocco, or I could go to Turkey, or I could go to Italy, and I can walk into a synagogue and be treated really like family, like a long lost family member, invited to dinner, invited to stay, have people take care of me. Become If I stay for 3 days, I become a local, and get treated like I've been there my entire life, and that is really a beautiful thing. And of course, we do take care of each other in terms of kind of social services and those kinds of things. We have a lot of communal institutions that are there to take care of people, older people, and so forth. And that's really a beautiful thing, and I really appreciate that kind of communal feeling. And it has its downsides. Sometimes we are maybe too casual with each other, right? I mean, we all know how families treat each other sometimes. Sometimes when people think of each other as family, they can be dismissive of each other, or they could be a little rough on each other. That certainly does happen, and that's the downside of that experience, right? Is that we can be maybe a little bit too familiar with each other. Um, Another aspect I think that I love about my Jewish culture, since I brought up the topic, is our love of learning, and I guess that's related to the questioning. But we have an incredible emphasis on education and the importance of learning, particularly on learning Torah, right? Learning religious texts, but not just that. Really having a curiosity about the world, and for religious people, of course, understanding that as God's world, and being curious about God's world, but also just really having a powerful interest in scholarship and in finding in reading and learning and exploring knowledge, and that's a feature of my Jewish culture that I appreciate quite a lot. Welcome, Amal. Amal has joined us. Welcome. So, I'm I'm doing the strangest thing right now of kind of talking to myself. I've been doing a very good job, I think, of talking to myself so far, but it's very nice to have someone else to talk to. And if anybody else would like to join Amal and I, that would be wonderful. I would be very happy to have you. So my question today, Amal, is about culture. I was, for various reasons, I was thinking a lot about culture today. And so my question is, what is it about your particular culture? And I'm going to, I think, as I said about myself, my culture is complicated because I'm Jewish and I'm American, and those are two different things, and yet, they combine in me. And so there are some things about me which are Jewish, some things which are American, and I have to relate to both of those things, and I can talk about both of those things. And I've been talking about both of those things. But at the same time, they do have an impact on me. And there are things about my Jewish culture that I love, and some that I don't love so much, and things about my American culture that I love, and some things I don't love so much. So Amal, maybe share a little bit about your culture, where you come from, and maybe kind of how, what about your culture, as where you're from, kind of you really like, and maybe something that you don't like so much.
Okay. Sorry. So my background is both of my parents are Somali. So I'm East African. I grew up in London. But I was born in Saudi Arabia. I came here when I was 1. So I don't. Whenever someone asks me where I was born, I tell them Saudi Arabia. I have no affiliations with Saudi culture, so I'll take that away. So at school it'll be it's really different for me, because in the area that I grew up in London is East London, so it's like a pot, and there was majority of the pupils in my school were South Asian background.
Mm-hmm.
And there weren't many English students in my school, so there were some Nigerians and Jamaicans, but the only English people that I interacted was with 3 English students and the teachers. So when I go home, it's like a Somali household, so the cultures kind of conflict with each other because it's very homogeneous. And when I go back to school, I'm carrying another culture, and then I go to mosque is another culture. So as I was growing up, I was kind of confused of who I was, because I'm interacting with so many cultures, and then when I go home, it's like a separate culture. So I don't really know who I am at that point. I'm confused, because I haven't grew up in an area that it's mainly one culture.
That's interesting. There's a term. I'm going to put it up on the board just to show you. There's a term called code switching, for people who are able to kind of navigate different, you know, those different kind of cultural environments that you described. So Somali at home and South Asian at school and British on the street and all of these things have like different expectations, right? And then the mosque, you know, maybe that's also maybe South Asian, or maybe not, right? I mean, so how, you know, like all of them carry different expectations in the way that about the way that you speak and the way what you speak about, opinions, and right. So that's definitely and what people learn to do, maybe you learn to do that, is how to kind of go between, there he is, how to go between those things. Okay, so now okay, I'm gonna.
I'm sorry, I had an emergency to deal with, and it took me a little bit of time. Okay,
no problem.
So where are we, Lee?
So so you saw my topic. My topic is first of all, what is our culture? Which is not an easy question necessarily, and we just determined that both Amal and I have complicated answers to that question. Okay, those kind of complicated answers, and then kind of what are some of the things that you really love about your culture or cultures, and other things which maybe you don't love so much. So I just kind of got Amal to share, like, and I've been vamping because there was nobody here, so I was talking to myself for a while. And
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I wanted to be here right away, but I just had this emergency.
It was an interesting exercise. I very rarely talk to myself in public. Usually I talk to myself in private, but this was interesting. I don't know if anybody's going to ever watch that, but heaven help them if they do.
That's right.
So Amal just shared with me her kind of complicated cultural background, and I haven't gotten to what she likes, doesn't like yet. So, but I will get to that. Hanina, why don't you share what's your kind of cultural background?
Well, I live in a whole bunch of different cultures that have little to do with one another. I'm a musician, and I'm a pretty highly respected musician in the United States, and I'm also a very committed Jew, but those two different worlds really don't intersect with one another. So, so my struggles in both cultures have nothing to do with one another. In my music culture is trying to find my place in it. It's just like I'm a teacher. I'm a leader of, a community leader here in terms of the different types of music that I love and have competence in. And I have struggles in that world also, trying to make a living. In the Jewish world, I have a lot of respect for Judaism and people who are Jews, who are brothers and sisters of mine. But on many levels, I find myself being an outsider. Because and that's a struggle for me in my culture, being that I have my own ways of viewing my connection with the divine, and it's not necessarily the same as for them, and so it's a source of it could be a source of a lot of conflict, being that I have my own derech, my own path. That doesn't coincide so easily with others. I don't know if that explains things or
I think it does, and it in the sense also that we're not always insiders, right? I guess when I asked the question, so how do you feel about your what are some things you like about your culture, and then as we're answering the question, even as I was answering the question for myself, sometimes I'm an insider, sometimes I'm an outsider, right? Sometimes I'm able to, one of the advantages of code switching, of living in multiple cultures, is that it allows you to kind of look at things maybe more objectively that you wouldn't necessarily. You know, my grandparents were very solidly Eastern European Jews, and their culture was much more coherent than mine. Mine is much more, I have a lot more cultural influences. They have much less. I think they were less kind of likely to see themselves from the outside than I am because of my position in the world, right? But still, I feel, you know, somebody once, back in my anthropology days, I remember somebody once said, you know, that we are fish and culture is the water in which we live. You know, it's very hard. You imagine trying to talk to a fish about water. It'd be really difficult. It's like, what's water? I don't know what water is. Water is just what I've lived in my entire life. And I think
Right.
to a large extent, that's, you know, how it is for a lot of people, but not necessarily for us. And I would say that any three people who are talking on social media, you know, across the world are likely to be, you know, a little bit culturally outsiders to some extent, right? Kind of self-selected for that. But
Right.
so
But the thing is, like, sometimes the complexities, you know, that we have that could cause issues for us, sometimes are our strengths, you know, because we are a sum total of our experiences in life. And a lot of things that we do, I'm finding that at 68 years old, I've been through a lot of different things, and I'm really grateful for it because it's given me a insight as a result of where all these things intersect with one another.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's where wisdom comes with age, is that you know, all these things that you've been through intersect with one another in strange ways, and carve out who you are.
Yeah, true.
And in so doing, though, later as you progress in life, in a way, it becomes easier because you start being able to connect these things. Early on in your life, you're overwhelmed with these connections. You know, it's just like, but
Right.
later on in life, you kind of accept, whoa, you know,
right. You become
I've had an interesting life. Look what I've done, you know, and
right.
you know, even though some of these things are crazy, but nonetheless, you start to see how it all fits together.
Right. You know, and living in those worlds becomes easier. So, Amal, maybe talk a little bit about what is it about your kind of Somali background, maybe something that really, like, that you just love. or maybe that, or is that, or something that maybe you don't love so much.
I like the culture, like the like it's dying. Like, for example, this would be like something that would represent my culture. People, my background is like my grandparents and my mom. They were like nomad herders. So my mom was like a nomad shepherd's girl, and with this, you just open it and then you pour milk into it, and then you just leave it in and then you drink it. And then there's like, they used to live like in the hut, and then you like do weaving. That's the thing that I appreciate, and how they had like camels and a herd of sheep and goats. And now that's dying. People are trying to like become a little bit westernized, but they're not really westernized over there. So that's one aspect that I like about my culture. But the other aspect I don't like about my culture is that it's away from the world. They're not really connected to the world. It's just like a very homogeneous country. It's very patriarchal, and I don't understand that aspect because I grew up in England. So, and it kind of like whenever I go there, I stand out. People know that I come from abroad. The way I walk, the way I talk.
Oh, Well,
the way, and I was like really like shocked. How do they know the way I talk and walk? I have an accent when I speak Somali, so of course they're gonna know, but it's the way I walk. I walk really differently, and if I use a spoon, they will tell me that I'm not European. Use your hand, and I don't like using my hand. It's really weird to like use my hand.
wow.
So yeah, and I feel really different when I'm with them. Even here, the Smiles that live in London, I don't get along with them because of the area that I grew up in was very South Asian area and Nigerian and Jamaican. So I have like a different culture towards them.
So do you feel very comfortable in kind of South Asian Pakistani culture? Is that more
No.
comfortable for you? No.
No, I feel like an outsider looking in. So yeah, I never fit into a group. I'm always like walking around.
It's very interesting. You know, you mentioned that nomadic thing. I have I think I also have romantic, you know, my you know, our ancestors of course were nomads, and I have fantasies of becoming, you know, like a Middle Eastern sheep herder. I have, you know. How about you, Hanina?
Yeah, I just find it fascinating. I didn't know that about Amal. That's fascinating. So, I mean, we're all outsiders. You know, that's what's really interesting. You know, here we are. You know, I mean, I'm taking a look at our 3 squares on the screen and realizing that we're all 3 of us are outsiders. You know, I mean, am I right in saying, that, Lee? I didn't hear what you had to say, but I'm assuming that you were to some degree an outsider. Is that?
Yeah, actually, you know, funny, I didn't actually talk about that. But yeah, certainly that's true. I mean, yeah, certainly that's true. You know, like I'm a Jewish guy. You know, I'm an American Jewish guy who spent a few years in India studying South Asian languages. You know, a Tamil speaking Orthodox Jewish guy. I guess I'm probably kind of a little on the fringes of certain things.
Right, but also, you know, how you look at things and how you interact with people.
For
You
sure.
know, it's different.
For sure.
You know, than you know, it's you know, I see in a good way. I see you as an outsider, Lee.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes that, you know, you feel that more, you know, sometimes you feel that more than other times. You know, if I go to your old stomping grounds, to, you know, Borough Park, right, I feel very much like an outsider. You know, I feel like an insider on one, right, because the schedule of life and the flow of life is very, you know, very much the same as mine, right? But and there's a lot of, you know, beautiful convenience and whatever else, you know, that kind of fits well into my lifestyle. At the same time, my attitudes and so on can be very different from other people who may look like me or act like me in certain respects. It's that's for sure true.
I mean, when I go back to Borough Park, I mean, I have very fond memories of growing up there. But
So
when I go back, I hate it. You know, absolutely just hate it.
So Borough Park, so for Amal, Borough Park, when you're talking about kind of like a is sort of a Jewish ghetto. I don't know a better way to describe it, but it's one of those very insular kind of neighborhoods.
But it's a neighborhood that really changed over time. You know, my mother was born 10 blocks away from where I was born.
Right.
You know, she grew up there. It was like an Italian and Jewish community. People got along really well. It was also kind of an a little more upscale community in New York City in the 1920s and 1930s, and people moved there when they wanted to try to up their lifestyle.
So when you think of yourself, I'm gonna ask an interesting question. I hadn't thought of like music as a culture, but when you look at music as a culture, what is it about musical culture that like you really like? You could sort of point and say, wow, you know, this is a feature of musical culture of the culture of musicians that I really dig.
Well, it's the kind of the music that I play. The music I play is traditional American music, and it's repetitive. It's trance-like. Um, it's very communal. People play together. It's not like jazz where someone takes a break and then someone else takes a break and then the third person where someone is highlighted. It's the light is on them and then the light is on someone who takes a solo. Type of music plays people all playing together and playing in kind of for a long period of time. So the thing is like it's like davening. It's like praying for me.
So is that the music, or is that also the culture of the musicians? So do you find
it's this type of
that those traditional American musicians have kind of a communal consciousness and are
it's not all traditional. Like bluegrass is not that way at all. Bluegrass is more of a solo. A fiddler takes a break, a banjo player takes a break, whatever. But in this older form of traditional American music, it's communal. Everyone is playing together, and it's like it's a community thing, and also it's very trance-like. So that's what draws me into it. I love community, and I like to get stoned on music.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's safe and legal.
It's safe mostly. So Amal, so what do you say? You're also you're part of British culture, right? I mean, you're in the UK. So is there something about British culture that you kind of admire and just say, wow, this is just an amazing feature of being in the UK?
I never thought about it. I don't know. I don't like the Queen and the
people in the UK. She said no.
I do like the British culture. I'm part of the British culture, but I haven't thought about it. I don't like tea. Everyone thinks everyone likes tea. I don't like the Queen. I'm sorry, I don't like the Queen.
Shh. Don't tell anybody that. It's all right. It's all right.
Maybe I also don't understand British humor. For some odd reason, I just don't understand it. It's too dark.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. I'm not sure I understand British humor either. Like sometimes I really enjoy it, and other times I feel like it's going past me. Like I'm either too stupid or uninformed to really get it. But okay.
I like the Beatles and past musicians like Beatles, David Bowie. Who else? I can't remember. There's so many of them that I like, and I think that they're better than American musicians. But now I don't like the music scene here. It's too rubbish. I don't like it. Like I like the past.
It's funny. I guess I have a limited interaction with British people, although I have a good friend here now who was raised in the UK, and I think one of the things that Americans tend to like about British culture is that the English feel very polite to us.
Oh yeah, I would say sorry to people even if I don't mean it. Like if someone barges into me, I'll say sorry, and then if I accidentally touch them, sorry, and it really doesn't mean you're saying sorry. It's just sorry. It's part of the culture. So
I feel like there's something beautiful in that. That kind of I don't know. I don't know the word decorousness or something. I don't know. It feels I don't know. There's something, I think there's something beautiful in that. It's very different in America. I think we have a little bit of that, but it comes off as being more crude somehow, you know.
Yeah, Americans are a bit too blunt, I suppose.
Right.
Here we're like very passive aggressive. Like we want to say something, but we don't want to say it. So
Passive aggressive or tactful. That's the other, you know, passive aggressive or tactful. So, Hanina, you and I share a Jewish culture. What is there about our Jewish culture that, you know, you think just wow, like what an incredible thing?
What is it? What's incredible to
Yeah,
me?
do you have anything about our Jewish culture that you just find moving, important, incredible?
Well, lately, strangely enough, Lee, what I find is I've been got ever since COVID started, I got into storytelling. I I started getting into these Zoom sessions with these storytellers because there were tons of them because people weren't connecting to one another, so they were using Zoom a lot, and I discovered this whole world of storytellers, and and I I've been and so the long story short, I've developed into a storyteller, and my specialty is like Jewish stories, and um, and I find that's really purposeful for me in
Mhm.
terms of connecting because I think story people are used, when they're little, they're read to, people are read to, and then all of a sudden it stops, and it's really not a logical reason why it should stop. And it would be so much better if it continued and if people continue to tell stories to each other and to relate to one another that way. I think we'd be in a kind of saner place. Plus, when you tell a story or you listen to a story, be attentive to somebody. Like on these story circles on Zoom, people in open telling, like when there's not a feature teller, people tell stories usually about 6 minutes long.
Mhm.
And at first it was kind of hard through it, but now I can sit through and then really enjoy a story for 6 minutes and listen to it and totally get into the magic of it without thinking to myself, what am I going to say next? You know?
Oh, although I must say, you know, what I hear you describing is a very non-Jewish experience, because you know, I think our culture tends to be we tend to interrupt each other a lot. We tend to like, you know, somebody tries to tell a story and yeah, the story goes on, but there's comments and
Not
interruptions.
I don't think that's so though. I'm
Oh,
like at least the way I remember like my grandparents or my parents telling me stories, they were telling and I was listening,
good, good. I mean, I know what you're talking about, that beautiful silence. I was a high school teacher, right? And I also like to tell stories. And what would happen is, you know, I would promise the kids, you know, that I would tell them a story. You know, they liked my stories, and or you know, we had like weekly prayer things, whatever, and I would often tell a story, and
Yeah.
it was amazing because it was the only time when the entire school would get quiet.
Hmm.
Right? I would tell a story, and all of a sudden, like, it was like this absolute, like, serene quiet, and this, you know, total attention. And yeah, there is that. And I think it's also, I mean, I think storytelling, not just formal storytelling, but informal storytelling, has a very has a peculiar place in Jewish. You know, we're much less likely to make a point. I think as a culture, much less likely to make a point uh, with a proverb than we are with a story. Meaning to say, like, more likely to, you know, if you ask me about something and you say, "What do you think about this?" I'm saying, "No, let me tell you a story. Like, this happened to me," and I think that's tends to be our way of communicating. We tend to tell
Absolutely.
a lot of stories.
I'm
Uh,
curious. I'm curious what Amal's background is with stories. In terms of your culture. I mean, did you have Did you have people read to you when you were little?
Yeah. So when I was around 8 or 9, I didn't know how to read because no one at home knew how to teach me. So I would
Right.
have this English lady called Mary. She would volunteer to my school, and she would take me out for my class, and she would read me stories, and we would get like books, and while she's reading it to me, she would ask me to read back to her, and then she would tell me about her life, her family, and I used to find it fascinating that it was different from my background, and I really like adored her because she was teaching me something, but she was also interacting with me emotionally. And as a child, I always liked people telling me stories. I would gravitate towards people who were like elderly when I was a little girl. And so at home, elderly people would come and they would tell me their stories when they were young. And they would tell me stories about how they fought a lion or how they ran away from a lion,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. And I was like really fascinated. And till this day, as an adult, I still am fascinated by stories.
Me too. Me too. I find it's a magic world, really. It's just
Although
incredible.
it can't be that everybody I know from East Africa has run away from has like fought a lion. I feel like I know too many lion stories. Okay? I feel like everybody I know from East Africa has had a run-in with a lion, which seems like it can't really happen. Just I don't know.
But it doesn't matter because the stories are magical.
Yes, I mean, listen. Once you any obviously any story of any interaction with a lion is definitely
It doesn't have to be with a lion. It could be an interaction with a bumblebee.
less magical. I mean,
No, not really. Or a frog, or
maybe frog.
there are wonderful stories. There's a whole collection that Howard Schwartz has and Panina Schramm have collections of Jewish stories. Just many of them just having to do with animals.
Yes, I'm now reading. This is apropos of nothing, but I know there was a 19th century writer, Andrew Lang, who published all these books of stories from all over the world.
Mhm.
There's the Olive Book and
The Blue Book and the
Blue Book,
right.
I'm actually reading them now.
Wow, awesome.
I'm actually, now in my old age, I'm reading them, and I'm reading the Arabian Nights tales.
You should tell them.
Yeah, maybe I will tell them one day.
I know,
maybe,
but you should have a session where you're just telling stories and
maybe
speaking about them.
Yeah, maybe
I'm serious.
I'd love to do that, and maybe one day, for this chit chat, maybe next week, instead of doing this, maybe we'll just open it up for storytelling, and
That would be great.
yeah, let's do that.
Maybe Amal will tell a story from.
Yeah, Amara, you can tell a story next week.
I'm not that
No,
great.
you want to. You're going to do great.
That would be great. And I used to play quite a bit with Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, and so I heard him tell stories because he told stories all the time at his performances, and he was a magical storyteller. Oh my God! So I learned a lot from him, just
sure,
watching him and listening to him and seeing him tell stories.
Anyway,
yeah, let's do that. Let's do that next week. Stories.
Okay, so next week, stories. Amal, you have an entire week to think of a story, and it can even be about a lion.
Yes, a lion story.
A lion story. Okay. I get Amal's lion story. I'll actually share. I'll share this story because it's a great story, and then we'll take us out with the story.
Okay.
So Amal was talking about nomads, and about people who have sheep. So I was once in the Moscow airport, and in those days there was no seats in the Moscow airport, and so you had to keep walking around in circles, right? And I had a 9-hour delay, and I was exhausted from walking around in circles. And I'm walking, and all of a sudden, I see this guy standing in front of me, and he's draped in furs. He's wearing this gigantic fur coat, right? But it's not like a fur coat, it's furs, okay? It's furs. And he stands up and he puts his arms out and he goes, "It's you." I said, "What?" He said, "Are you a Jew?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm a nomad." I said, "That's great." He said, "No, I'm a nomad. I have sheep." He said, "You're a nomad. You have sheep?" I said, "What?" He said, "I am a nomad. I have sheep. You're a nomad. Do you have sheep?" I'm looking at him. I said, "What?" He said, "You're Jewish." I said, "Yes, you must have sheep." So I finally said, like, "What are you talking about?" Like, so it turns out he's a Mongolian nomad, okay, and he lives in a yurt. He lives in a yurt on the tundra, but he has a satellite dish, and he was poking around on the internet in the middle in his yurt in the middle of nowhere, and he found this stuff about Jews, right? And he found a copy of the Talmud in Russian. And there's all this stuff about animals, right? About lost animals and found animals. And so he assumed that people who were talking so much about sheep must have sheep. And then he looked into it and he found that, we had these ancestors and they were shepherds and nomads. And so when he saw me, he thought, aha, another nomad. He thought I lived in a tent somewhere and I had sheep. So,
So Lee, do you have sheep?
not exactly.
So I have a quick story to take us out if you want.
Please.
No? Okay, hold on 1 second. It's a story about stories. But I think it would be good maybe as something to set us up for next week when we can hear Amal tell her lion stories. Okay. A long time ago, the Dubner Maggid was walking with one of his students along the banks of a river. And as they talked, the Maggid told a story to explain a certain Jewish tradition. Suddenly, the student stopped and asked, "Rabbi, tell me, how do you always know the right story to explain the subject being discussed?" The rabbi smiled and said, "I'll answer you with a story," which is what Lee would say. Many years ago, a nobleman's son was a student at a military academy, and one of the sports in which he was expert was shooting bullseyes. In fact, he had won many gold medals for his marksmanship. After he was awarded his diploma, the young officer rode home on his horse. Passing through a tiny village, he saw 100 circles drawn on the side of a barn. And in the center of each circle was a bullet hole. The officer was so amazed, he stopped his horse and yelled out, "Who is the expert shot? 100 perfect bullseyes. That's incredible. Even I couldn't do that." Just then, a young boy walked by, looked up at the officer on his tall horse and snickered, "Oh, that's Nar, our town fool." "I don't care what he is," interrupted the officer. "Whoever can shoot 100 perfect bullseyes must have won every gold medal in the world. I must meet him and shake his hand." "Oh, no, you don't understand," laughed the boy. Nar doesn't draw the circle. Doesn't draw the circle first and then shoot. He shoots first, and then he draws the circle.
Yeah, beautiful.
And that's how it is with me, continued the Dubner Maggid. I don't always know the right story for the subject being discussed. What I do is read many stories and listen to many stories and remember all these stories. And then when I find a story I want to tell, I introduce the subject that leads me into telling the perfect story.
Yeah, Yeah, beautiful. That's exactly right. Well, with that, that'll take us out, and next week we'll kick off
Stories.
with stories, and poor Amal. It doesn't have to be a lion story. You
No,
know.
no, no. Doesn't happen.
Okay,
No.
it has to be a lion story. Tigers are good too.
And any story, any story.
Okay, see you later, guys. Have a beautiful week.
You too.